ready, baby. Think I'm ready now. Electricity, I'm flying into you. Think electric, baby. So electric, baby. Wanna let you know, let you know. Think I'm ready, baby. Think I'm ready now. Electricity, I'm flying into you. Even if I could, I wouldn't turn on you. And I would stop the world for you, you know. I wanna let you know I never let this feeling go. This love has no ceiling, I cannot deny. Even if I could, I wouldn't turn on you. And I would stop the world for you and I wanna let you know I never let the feeling go. This love has no ceiling, I cannot deny. So electric, baby. So electric, baby. Wanna let you know, let you know. Think I'm ready, baby. Think I'm ready now. Electricity. Woo! Feel electric, baby. So electric, baby. Wanna let you know, let you know. Think I'm ready, baby. Think I'm ready now. Electricity. I see the moon, I see the moon, I see the moon. Oh, when you're looking at the sun. Not a fool, not a fool, not a fool. No, you're not fooling anyone. Oh, but when you're gone, when you're gone, when you're gone. Oh, baby, all the lights go out. Thinking of that, baby, I was wrong, I was wrong, I was wrong. Come back to me, baby, we can work this out. Oh, baby, come on, let me get to know you. Just another chance so that I can show that I won't let you down. No, I won't let you down. 'Cause I could be the one. I could be the one. I could be the one. I could be the one.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our realcommercial.com.au economic update via webinar. My name is Damien Brooks, National Sales Director of realcommercial.com.au, and we're very lucky to have with us today Nerida Conisby, REA Group Chief Economist. And with over 600 registrations, it really does tell me there's a huge appetite for this type of content, particularly in relation to COVID and property. So during today's discussion, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and there will be time for Q&A at the end of Nerida's presentation, along with a short poll, which we'd love you to complete as well. So without any further ado, Nerida, I'm going to hand over to you.
Great, thank you, Damien. So today I'm going to give you a bit of an economic update. There is a lot of information out there already in terms of what's happening with the economy. So I'm sure a lot of you have been tracking that pretty closely. But I'm also going to draw upon some of the data that we're seeing coming out of Real Commercial. So some of the data with regards to views, also some of the locations that seem to be coming out of here a little bit more unscathed compared to other locations. So I will share my screen, and I hope this works. The last presentation I gave, it messed up a little bit. All right, that worked. So starting with what the government is trying to do right now. So they have put in an enormous amount of stimulus into the market. In terms of what they're trying to achieve is really to stop job loss. At the moment, we do have a productivity crisis. It's very difficult for us to do our jobs properly. And that's cutting across more and more sectors as time goes by. And then for those that lose their jobs, really to support them, that they can cover off basic expenses. So whether that's rent, food, and utilities, those sorts of things. So really to try and keep things fairly stable as much as possible while we go through all this COVID-19 related economic conditions. The second bit that they're trying to do is really just to support businesses and really to make sure that business can get through the other side of this and not go bankrupt, because the more distress we see in the business world, the more problems we'll have in terms of getting the economy back up and running when this is over. Because of course this will be over at some stage, ideally sooner than later. It is likely that we will see a slow return to normal economic conditions rather than a fast return. But once the economy starts to come back, it's highly likely it will be a pretty fast recovery from then on. The final bit is around the finance sector. So we have come into this crisis in very good economic shape, particularly when we compare ourselves to other parts of the world. We did go in with a budget surplus, so we are spending an enormous amount of money to get ourselves through this, but at least we had a bit of money sitting there in the first place. The other issue is around the banks. So the banks are doing fine. We don't have a banking crisis in any way. Quite different to the situation in Italy at the moment. So Italy went into this COVID-19 health crisis with a very shaky banking system. And so it is likely that they will suffer a lot more than from an economic perspective than we will be going in with a strong banking system. So ideally, keep us employed, make sure businesses don't go bankrupt, and also just make sure that our financial system is well supported to get us through the next 3 to 6 months. Enormous amount of stimulus. So this level of stimulus is unprecedented. It amounts to 16.4% of GDP. To give you an idea as a comparison, the GFC, there was around 4% of GDP pumped into the economy. So it is an enormous amount of money that the government is spending really just to ensure that we come out of this relatively unscathed. I'm not going to go through every single stimulus package. There has been 3 announced so far. I guess in terms of what's great for commercial property, the first one is really around keeping businesses afloat. We've got new loan guarantees, depending on how big your business is. We've got JobKeeper programs so people don't become unemployed if possible. We've got extremely low interest rates, so 0.25%. So at this stage, it's unlikely to get any lower, although there is always discussion around potentially going into negative rates. I don't think that's really on the table at this stage. And then the final one is around mortgage payment freezes. So big deal in residential, potentially hits the developer market as well, but this will help keep things a lot more stable than they otherwise would have been. That we will see people go into financial distress, but if they can keep their mortgage payments on ice, that will help a lot of people through the next time period. In terms of what needs more work, there is a National Cabinet meeting on currently around the 6-month tenancy eviction freeze. Very, very big deal for commercial property. Any of you that own shopping centres or involved in retail leasing are fully aware of the issues involved here. I was hoping to have more information on that by this call, but as yet there really hasn't been anything released. So hopefully tonight we'll see a bit more clarity around how landlords will be able to get through this relatively unscathed, because a lot of them are very, very concerned about what the 6-month tenancy eviction freeze means. In terms of forecasting, I mean, we do need to be really careful at the moment in terms of what's happening with the economy, but also with what's happening to property. So, at this stage, if you're looking at forecasts for rents, if you're looking for forecasts for values, it's virtually impossible to be able to make a call at this stage. So the reason being is that things are just too uncertain. We don't know how long this will last. There's alternating good and bad news every week. I mean, it was a good sign for me to see those COVID-19 cases, the number of cases come down a bit. In New South Wales last night, I think they were under 100 new cases. But alternatively, we are continuing to see this skyrocketing unemployment rate. So it is a mix of good and bad news. I guess in terms of what else is quite different this time around is that the government stimulus is unprecedented. We've never had so much being put into the economy in our lifetimes, and also that it is very, very different to the last 3 downturns. We don't have a financial crisis here. We do have a productivity crisis. We just can't work properly. So if you go back to pretty much the last 3 times where we saw big hits on property, the 1990s recession, Victoria doing particularly badly, banks almost going under because of commercial property loans, global financial crisis really hitting the finance sector, and then any commercial property related to finance or related to finance employees. And then Financial Services Royal Commission, which really didn't impact commercial property all that much, but did have a big hit on the residential sector. The big deal around where we'll be impacted, I'll talk about that in a sec, but it will be highly variable across Australia. It will be highly variable across different asset classes as well. So to make blanket assumptions or blanket calls around what the impacts will be across all property types is it's unlikely. I mean, it's impossible that it will happen that way. There will be a high divergence in terms of performance. In terms of what the forecast to look out for, I think anything based on more micro level data is going to be more accurate. So looking very closely at capital city, looking very closely at sector impacts for commercial property will be really, really important. Some early thoughts as to what could happen. I guess in terms of the mortgage freeze payments, they will help keep a cap in terms of how much prices will fall. I think without those, we would be seeing high levels of distress already in the residential sector in particular. Not a little bit less. It's not as relevant, obviously, for commercial property, but does extend on to the economy in general. We will see employment growth. So, I think this is important that we have been focusing a lot on the fact that we have got lots and lots of job loss occurring at the moment, and enormous numbers of people applying for job seeker payments and companies applying for the JobKeeper program. But if you have a look at some sectors, health will be a big one. We are going to need more and more people employed in the health sector. That does impact medical related commercial property. But probably the bigger one will be government. So given how reliant the office sector in some locations is on government, all that stimulus being put into the economy, the 16.4% of GDP, it will need more people within ATO, within Centrelink, within Department of Health. We are going to see a greater need for more government workers to be able to distribute all this stimulus properly. The areas that will be, the locations that will be impacted most will be those that are very exposed to tourism, very exposed to education. Foreign students will be slowing down for a little while. So I guess in terms of the markets at the moment in which I'm predicting will be quite different. I guess Canberra is the main one. Canberra being very much a government-led city. Also, what we're seeing on our site is looking very different in Canberra. So I won't go through it today. It is primarily residential related, but first home buyer activity, for example, in Canberra is up 58%. When we have a look at inquiry levels from that group, everywhere else it's dropping. So very different conditions in Canberra to the rest of Australia. The other market that could be a major beneficiary will be Perth. So in the same way during the global financial crisis that Perth really surged ahead of mining demand, it could happen again. We are seeing a lot of demand for iron ore. It is expected to reach $100 billion worth of exports this financial year. We do have a lot of people flocking to gold at the moment. Gold is often seen as the ultimate safe haven in terms of an investment class. And it has reached record high pricing in Australia. It's also it's also a metal type that we are very good at exporting. So I think next year, 2021, we will be the biggest exporter of gold in the world. So again, iron ore, gold are both very, very good for WA. The WA government has also been very careful with border shutdowns and allowing cruise ships and all those things. So I guess that they are no doubt fully aware that things could be quite good for their economy, or very good for their economy, if they're able to keep COVID-19 infections at bay. Does it feel like Christmas? Well, it really doesn't for me. It's not much fun at the moment. But in terms of search activity, what we can see is that if you have a look at what's happening with search on Real Commercial, so realestate.com.au, we are seeing buyer search levels looking roughly similar to the Christmas New Year period. So what we see with commercial property search, it does remain pretty stable throughout the year. We don't see it, we don't see it swing around. Residential, we see it swing around a little bit more, but commercial property is always stable. But get to that Christmas New Year period and we see a sharp reduction in the number of searches and the number of views for properties on our site. So buyers are far less active. I guess the point of this flow is that on one hand, we know that they are far less active and conditions have vastly changed, but the property market hasn't shut down. So I was talking to my equivalent at Zoopla this morning, and the UK property market has been shut down by the government there. So they're not allowed to buy or sell or look at properties or do anything over a 4-week time period. Here in Australia, we have been highly restricted in the way that we conduct open for inspections, which does impact commercial property, and we've also been impacted by auctions, but which is less of an impact for commercial property. But overall, the market is still running and there's things taking place and there is activity, so we haven't seen a total shutdown. Looking at what's been happening with views on our site, I guess the big ones around buy versus lease, and what we can see is when we have a look at views per listing, comparing March 2019 to March 2020, is a big drop in retail, hotels and bulky goods. So, again, it's not surprising given those three sectors have been extremely adversely impacted. Bulky goods obviously has been having a rough trot for quite some time. Retail as well has been pretty tough. Hotels is a little bit more recent, but at the moment there are far fewer buyers out there that are looking at that property type. Other end of the scale, you can see they're rural and agribusiness. So probably a couple of reasons for this. I guess, in this sort of crisis, we do still need to eat, so food does still need to be produced. But there's also the drought. So the drought has rapidly improved over the last few months. So rural and agribusiness properties are looking far more attractive to buyers, and we can certainly see that in terms of the views that are coming up. The other interesting ones, industrial down, not as much as some of the other sectors, and also development. So I thought that was quite interesting. I will talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the development sector later on, but holding up better certainly than what we're seeing in retail, hotels and bulky goods. So that's on the buyer side. When we have a look on the leasing side, no surprises. Again, you can see there retail down over 40% in terms of views per listing, office down almost 35, bulky goods down around the same level, and industrial really holding steady. So not surprising, industrial is one of those property types that is benefiting from this, because if we're not shopping in shopping centres, more of us will be shopping online, and it really is just an acceleration of that trend that more and more of us are shopping online and really have to now, because it's not as easy to get out of our homes, partly, but also when you go to your local shopping centre, there's really not much open, and a lot of shops have now just moved to online stores only. So big pickup in terms of industrial. I think one thing I will make comment though is that these are national trends. So when we have a look on a listing by listing basis, we can see quite different conditions taking place. So one of the top listings one of the most viewed listings actually on Real Commercial this week was in a suburb called Cobblebank in Melbourne, which I'm not that familiar with, but I think it's outer west. A shopping centre there with a leasing campaign actually saw some of the highest views, also saw the highest views at a national level over the past week. Similarly, if you go back to the medical listings, there is a hospital out at eastern Melbourne not abandoned, but a vacant hospital in eastern Melbourne that we are seeing a lot of activity at the moment. So I guess these are national figures, but we do see quite different conditions when we're having a look at it on an asset by asset basis. So the 6-month eviction freeze, it is a very big problem for commercial property. So on the tenant side, a lot of companies have gone from full income to zero income in a matter of weeks. The clarity, there was very little clarity, which I think frustrated a lot of people in terms of knowing how to deal with this. So on the one hand, you do have some tenants that are definitely going into distress and starting to see a lot of challenges. But you also have some tenants who would now be looking at the current circumstances as an opportunity to renegotiate lease terms. So, I think there is a lot of concern amongst landlords, as well as there being a lot of distress, and also potentially people just looking to get out of leases that they no longer felt were favourable even before the COVID-19 health crisis. We should have some more clarity on this today. As I mentioned before, there is a National Cabinet meeting on at this moment, so hopefully there will be some more detail available to landlords soon. Hotels, I'll just go through asset class by asset class. I guess hotels is, really struggling sector. Tourists are gone. We're all being told not to travel, even locally. I guess one of the things that will help the sector a little bit is that there is a 14-day overseas arrival quarantine. Most overseas arrivals come to Sydney first, and there are now currently 5,000 people in hotel isolation. So it's certainly not the type of business that many hotels were looking for or hoping to acquire, but it will help a lot of them get through the next few months at least, less unscathed than they otherwise would. So probably with less problems than they otherwise would. So potential outcomes, I guess domestic tourism will come back quicker. We do now have a lot of border shutdowns, which until it lifted will make it quite hard for people to travel. Eventually they'll come back up. It is unknown when overseas tourists will be allowed back in Australia. I think when we have a look at the situation that's happening in Europe and the US, until there's a vaccine is likely, can't really see us accepting plane loads of people from any of those regions. So I guess that's a big one. Any hotel that is domestic based or relying on domestic tourism will probably bounce back quicker than those that are relying on international tourism. Retail is tough. I don't think any of you who work in retail leasing or retail sales, or retail sales probably less so, but certainly retail leasing is very problematic at the moment. We are seeing supermarkets and anyone that sells non-discretionary doing pretty well. Very bad news for cafes, restaurants, gyms, those sorts of things. JB Hi-Fi doing okay, fashion doing very badly because they're all staying home, don't need to dress up. Health and safety issues emerging for some supermarket staff, with people getting very frustrated and upset with what's happening. Retail spending would be falling. I mean, the problem with a lot of the ABS data is it takes a little while for it to come through. So that makes it tough to work out exactly what the impact is, but there's no doubt that, I think most of us would be spending less than we did even a few weeks ago as a result of COVID-19. I think in terms of the eviction freeze, this is the sector that is the most problematic right now. So, eventually the eviction freeze will become a problem for office, but for now it's really hitting landlords in the retail sector. In terms of some potential outcomes longer term, more of us are getting used to shopping online. So I guess, there has been a trend of more shopping taking place online. I think that will be something that more and more of us will get used to doing. And then I guess once it's over too, will the stimulus be enough to get people spending again? And, I think it will. I think once we're all out of our self-isolation and are working normally and doing things normally again, I do think we will start to spend again like we used to. But whether we do that in shopping centres or online, I think that dynamic will probably be quite different. Office sector, immediate, right now there's probably very few offices that have people in them. Most people are working from home. We are all being told to work from home if we can. There will be some companies that do require rent relief or will ask for rent relief. Potentially the eviction issue will be a problem as well. I guess for those offices that are still occupied, which there are some, cleaning and hygiene are now a priority. So there has been a step up for a lot of property managers in terms of how they deal with people, making sure they don't cram themselves into lifts, making sure there's lots of gel around for hygiene reasons and the like. So potential outcomes, I think one of the things we will see a rising vacancy. I mean, we are likely to see companies become bankrupt, even though there are a lot of moves to try and prevent that. And there will be companies that will want rent reduction. So there will be a drop in rental levels as a result. More people working from home. I mean, it was a big rush for many companies that weren't used to working or having staff work remotely to try and get them up to speed and working in an environment that enabled them to do their jobs properly. I do think for some companies, they will be encouraging more people to work from home once this is over. I don't think, I think probably will come, one of the big changes that will come out of this is that we can work from home effectively, and what COVID-19 has really proved is that, that it doesn't necessarily mean people don't do their best work. In terms of the desirability of office as an asset class, I think it'll. I'm actually not sure what the eventual outcome will be. I can see clearly with retail that it is a problem that was happening before COVID-19. It will continue to be. Office does continue to be a highly desirable asset class, and I think even with rising vacancies, I don't necessarily think we'll see a fallout to the same degree that we will see in the retail sector. I do think some of the other big change, I think, will be around shared offices. So models like WeWork, they work well because it does put people that don't know each other together and working collaboratively. But if we are continued to be worried about health concerns of sharing offices with people we don't know, I think it may not be the end of them, but I think the way that they operate might be quite different. Similarly, the way we work in the office, things like hot desking will probably change. I know that even before we were all told to work from home, there was a lot of measures within our building in terms of the way that we operate, and I think that will continue. Don't think it'll be moved back to our own offices, though. I think that has well and truly run its course. Industrial property is largely protected. We can see it in leasing demand that it's quite different in terms of the way people are viewing this as a property type. They're still looking for properties to lease. Again, related back to these self-isolation methods, self-isolation, people being told not to go out if they can, and more people shopping online. There may be a bit of a fallout from anyone exposed to tourism, but I think overall it won't be impacted as much as pretty much every other asset class. So vacancy is unlikely to increase significantly. It was the asset class of choice from investors. We could see it in all the surveys that were done by the different agencies that industrial was coming up on top for the last couple of years. And then I guess sort of longer term, there will be greater investment in medical and pharmaceutical research. So it will be a bit of a beneficiary to some industrial places like Ryde in Sydney, also southeast Melbourne. Medical related property, we are seeing some properties see very high views. Overall, though, we have seen a bit of a drop. I guess there is a very strong demand for services. The industry is in crisis mode, and big decisions on selling or leasing are probably on hold. So it's there's probably less happening than otherwise would, or what will happen once it's all over. Some potential outcomes, I guess, high levels of government spending will be apparent on health. So expect more investment in hospitals, greater even things like aged care and retirement living, potentially more investment there in making sure that they're safe and ready to respond to a similar outbreak to COVID-19 if we have them in the future. Medical centres as well. So, I think it will extend even to the number of doctors and nurses that are put through university that, we just need to make sure that we're well equipped to deal with any future health emergencies. I do think investor demand is likely to be strong, pretty much because, the the landscape has changed so significantly. A little bit on development, I guess offshore buyers are backing off quickly. So this data we get from realestate.com.au. We don't get such good offshore property seeker data from Real Commercial. We don't see the same volumes, but what we have seen is a real pullback in activity from pretty much everywhere over the last few weeks. Hong Kong, Singapore, China in particular, New Zealand has really pulled back. So New Zealand is always growing. We always see quite strong increases in search activity month to month and week to week from New Zealand. But I guess now that they're also in lockdown, they're not as interested in looking at Australian property. The Chinese influence on the developer market. I mean, we hadn't seen it recover at all pretty much since the prices started to fall in Australia. So it wasn't back, and at this stage, it hasn't come back at any rate. The big drop off, though, Hong Kong is the big drop off. So we were seeing lots and lots of activity out of Hong Kong, but you can see there that it has dropped back over the past week. First home buyers are very interested in the unit market, also house and land. So, quite interesting that when we have a look at first home buyer inquiry levels, they're actually up. I mentioned before Canberra, they're up about 58%, but then actually year on year, they're not too bad. The month on month is looking a lot worse. So we saw a 20% drop in first home buyer inquiry levels. But very focused on the new home market, Melbourne CBD, you can see there, Parramatta units, and then the house and land market, primarily out west in Sydney is where we are seeing the most demand for house and land, and that does impact, I guess, development site sales in those locations. In terms of investors, they have really dropped off. They never really came back prior to this, and they have dropped off more, but again, there's some locations in there that they are still very interested in. Not surprisingly, they're all unit markets. Gold Coast, Melbourne CBD, Brisbane CBD, and then a couple of quite expensive locations where we are seeing very high inquiry. So Manly units with a $1.5 million median, seeing very high levels of inquiry, and then Sydney CBD with a median of over $1 million. So the bottom certainly hasn't fallen out of the investor market, has dropped by a third, but there are some locations that they are still very interested in. New developments, Canberra, is continuing to be a theme here. That Canberra views for new developments are up about 16%. Sydney was up about 1%. Elsewhere, we have seen a drop in the number of views for new developments. Probably a lot less of interest to this audience, but these are the new developments that we are continuing to see very high levels of activity in terms of search. So the Harrington Collection in the Rocks in Sydney is the development that has seen the most views on realestate.com.au, and it has actually increased in terms of activity by 40% when we have a look at February views versus March views. So, again, coming back to the fact that this crisis isn't impacting every market in the same way, and I think we do need to keep that in mind when we're looking at commercial property as a desirable asset class going forward. So I will finish there, and I'll get Damien to come back up, and we'll do some Q&A.
Great, thanks, Nerida. Presentation as always. So just a reminder, if you do have questions, you can pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. I'll just go to one of the questions as part of registration to kick things off. Thoughts on commercial property. As everyone gets used to working from home, will this devalue commercial as the need for larger premises may not be required?
Yeah, look, I suppose that directly relates to office property, and I guess I mentioned in the presentation, I do think it has allowed companies to see that people can work from home. I suppose the flip side of that is that we are all working from home, but it's not really always the greatest fun working from home, particularly if you've got young children at home, or your home isn't that comfortable to be working from home. So it won't drop off 100%, but I think some people who quite like working from home and have jobs that enable them to do so will be more likely to be able to do so in the future.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I'm interested I'm interested in your in the likely impact on neighbourhood shopping centres that include a major market and approximately 15 to 20 specialty stores.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. So I mentioned that development in Cobblestone. Oh gosh, I've got to remember. I actually made sure I wrote it down because, and I'm just going to have a look. Cobblebank Village. So Cobblebank Village on our side is actually seeing really high views, and over the past week has seen really high views. And I catch up with a journalist called Adrian Valentine every Thursday, and we talk through the most viewed commercial properties on our site, and he writes an article and puts it out there. And when we were talking about Cobblebank, we both kind of assumed it was a neighbourhood centre that was for sale. And, I was saying, oh, well, supermarkets are still doing well. There'll probably be a bit of problems trying to lease those vacant shops. And anyway, we both had a look at the listing a bit more closely, and we saw that it was actually a for lease listing. So that surprised me. I thought that the leasing market is obviously very, very tough, but the fact that we saw some pretty decent views was very, I thought that was quite positive. So, I think there's no doubt leasing will get harder, and, to have a really good retail leasing agent will be more and more important than, it's always been important, but I think it'll become even more important. So, provided you do have a good leasing agent on a property like that, which a supermarket centre should do pretty well in terms of a traffic perspective, it shouldn't be too much of a problem trying to lease that space.
Right, thank you. Is there anything happening with commercial outgoings during COVID-19? Not much information around this. For example, strata fees, water rates, council rates, etc.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen any data as yet. I mean, we're only now, my last presentation I gave on this to Cornet was probably 2-3 weeks ago. And at that stage, we just had no information at all what was happening. We knew that we obviously were in the middle of a health crisis, but it's only now that we're starting to get data as to what's been happening on at a property level. So look, at this stage, no, but I'm hoping that a lot of the industry bodies are starting to collect this data, and I'm not hoping they are collecting this data, and more of it will be released to us and give us a better perspective as to what's happening.
Right, thank you. Putting aside a recovery to the economy, what long-term effects on the industrial commercial property do you foresee as a result of COVID-19?
Industrial, it's just a very different asset class to the others because it is benefiting from all the technological change that's taking place. So, I've been speaking a lot about this for quite some time, that industrial, it is the one sector that does seem to be a little bit, not a little bit, but quite bulletproof to a lot of the other changes that are taking place. So, industrial long term, I can see why investors are so interested in it. I can see why it's had such a rapid change in the way that that people look at it, and it is related to the fact that leasing conditions are just so much different to when we compare it to retail, definitely, but even now office as well.
Great, thank you. The Q&A box, the live questions now. Do you think Airbnb and WeWork will come out on the other side, and thoughts on the impacts of the strata management industry?
Airbnb, they will come out on the other side. There will be Airbnb. We can see the problems emerging for you can see the problems emerging anyway, but on realestate.com.au, we have seen a big increase in the number of furnished rental listings over the last 3 weeks. So if you go to a market like Queensland in particular, we have seen this huge switch of what we think we pretty much assume is a switch from people who were Airbnb properties and can't lease them out, and are now converting them to full long-term rentals. So definitely a change for that industry. I don't think it won't die. It will come back eventually, but it is going to be a longer, harder road than some other parts of the economy. WeWork, they've got lots of problems, and the fact that people probably won't want to share offices as much is one of them. but I think they've probably got bigger problems than that. I do think it does question how well shared offices will go in the future. I mean, it was such a growth area and, seen as, it was a new part of the market, but as to how it will go in the future, I don't know. I think it will depend on how comfortable people are with sharing office space. The strata one, I'm not sure. I don't know. Sorry. I don't have a view.
Thank you. Do you see the forecast decrease in overseas students into our universities will have an impact on our commercial property markets? If so, how and why?
Yeah, I mean, it has to. It will have an impact broadly on many capital cities. I mean, if you have a look at Melbourne, the number one export from Victoria is overseas education. So, and then you've got universities like University of Sydney, which is 25% of students are Chinese international students. So, I think they'll come back. I mean, I don't think we've lost them forever. I just think because it will take a while for us to accept overseas arrivals, particularly if we get through COVID-19 okay. If we don't see the huge death rates and the huge number of cases that are occurring in the US and Asia and also in Europe, I think it will take us a long time to accept people, anyone coming in from overseas, whether that's tourists or whether it's students as well. So definitely education sector. I guess any office space related to the education sector impacts retail trade. We know that the biggest, one bright spot of the retail sector was luxury retail, and luxury retail now is being primarily driven by millennial Chinese, and if we don't have as many millennial Chinese travelling to Australia, it will impact luxury retail as well. So, there's all these flow-on effects that flow on from the fact that we will have fewer students. We will also have fewer overseas tourists as well.
Great, thank you. You see the medical sector will stand tall during this period or see a period of stagnation?
I think it'll do really well. Like I just think there's so much that's going to be done once this is over in terms of investment in our hospitals, investment in medical equipment, medical research. I know that I think it was last year's budget, there's quite a lot of money set aside for medical research. I do think, in the years to come, there will be more and more money put into that sector. So medical research, medical manufacturing, hospitals. I mentioned in the presentation, flowing through to the university sector, that we will be, I'm sure we'll be putting through more people through medical degrees, putting more, getting more nurses out there. I think there'll just be a real push to make sure that we're well equipped and we're not scrambling. Not that we're scrambling now, I think the health system is coping, but, if potentially it became a worse situation, we will be well equipped in the future.
Great, thank you. With the stimulus packages in place, do you forecast a positive rise in businesses looking to lease and expand comparative to before COVID-19, or think we will likely see a negative impact still?
I think, look, it'll come back to what sort of sector. I mean, if you've got tax office in your building, I think you're pretty right in terms of keeping tax office as a tenant. If you've got vacant space in your building and you've got tax office, I think you'll be pretty right as well. Compare it to other sectors. I mean, the finance sector is actually doing okay, but they may see now as an opportunity to cut staff as well. So I think there's some sectors that are really protected. I think government is really protected. Anyone involved in health is fairly protected. I think finance is more protected than it was in previous downturns potentially. Again, depends on how bad it gets. But then there's other parts of the market that will be much more adversely impacted.
What are your thoughts on potential land tax waivers for owners and implications on the market?
Yeah, look, I think, with the 6-month eviction freeze, there needs to be something done to help landlords. It was disappointing, the announcement. I mean, I think Scott Morrison's done an awesome job. Like it's such an unprecedented event and, very difficult to know exactly what to do. And, programs like the JobKeeper program, it does ensure that people stay employed, and that's ultimately what we want. But I think the eviction freeze has thrown a lot of people for six. That just knowing how to handle tenants who firstly, you know, obviously in financial, obviously in financial distress. So, you know, if you've got a, you know, a massage store, you know, anyone that's, or hairdressing, you know, those sorts of things have really been hit hard. But I think, you know, other tenants that could potentially still open but don't want to open because of the health crisis, you know, you can see their point, but then you can also see the landlord's point that, you know, they've got a business to run and they've got debts to pay, and, you know, there's whole sort of ramifications of this eviction freeze that, you know, hopefully there is something that can be agreed to try and get landlords through this.
With the Australian dollar falling, where do you see foreign buyers focusing their attention?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the US dollar is so high because everyone's piling into safe havens, and the US dollar is a safe haven. Yeah, I suppose the first point is the Foreign Investment Review Board has put a lot of measures in place so that foreign companies don't swoop in and grab everything, and you know, there's no national security issues that emerge from this. In terms of what foreign buyers, it'll be what local buyers want to buy. You know, it'll be probably industrial. There'll be groups looking for distressed assets. You know, so whether that's a distressed hotel or a distressed retail centre that they think they can do something with. Definitely agri. I think we're on agri. You know, the fact that we're seeing better conditions now than we saw last year would be a potential opportunity for a lot of foreign groups. So, and then medical as well. I think, you know, potentially a lot of groups looking at medical, not just in Australia, but probably around the world as well.
Will stamp duty relief potentially apply to new commercial investment purchases?
I don't know. You know, I think everything's up for grabs at the moment. You know, I can just imagine how the government is just getting thrown with so many ideas. But, you know, I think everything is being considered, and we will have greater clarity. I hope we get some more detail tonight as to what exactly will be provided in terms of relief for commercial property owners.
Well, I think we might leave it there, Nerida. So thank you very much again for your insights this afternoon. Before we do leave, there is a one question poll that we will share on the screen very, very shortly. So if you could please complete that. We'd love to continue with these webinars going forward. So please let us know how we went today. Apart from that, stay healthy, stay safe, stay at home, and enjoy your weekend. Thanks, everyone.